Barbara Radziwill is undoubtedly the most controversial queen of Poland. Myths about her still circulate, and many continue to repeat them like a mantra without completely delving into the subject. The greatest debauchee, disgrace, beloved or hated wife, beauty or hideousness, where is the truth? As usual, it lies in the middle. And what happened next is a perfect story for a film. Unfortunately, this story is practically unknown outside of Poland and Lithuania, which is a pity, because it is suitable for a film adaptation made by world-famous cinematographers. A romance, an unwanted queen, a charlatan and a mirror that exists to this day. A mirror in which you can see your face, in which you can see the future, in which you can see even Lucifer. History knows 3 such mirrors, which became the inspiration for Snow White. Probably all 3 were created by the same man. 2 are in Poland. Unfortunately, only 1 mirror is exhibited, and because it is in a church, many want it removed. Judging by the direction in which the mentality of the eastern frontiers of Europe is heading, you have to hurry to see the mirror. The 3rd is in Germany. Fortunately, no one wants to remove anything here, but there's a little problem: we won't longer see everything. Whether you can actually see the future in them is more a matter of faith, and as we know, strong faith can create hallucinations. Especially when adrenaline is involved. The king certainly saw something, but it was a hoax that no one in their right mind would dare to attempt, and Lucifer heartily condemned and laughed. This charlatan was Laurentius Dhur, and that worse, the king married the ghost. To find out how this happened, we need to learn the story of the king's second wife. A woman from one of the most powerful noble families in Europe to this day, Barbara Radziwill. In her time, nothing yet predicted that this family would join the most powerful in Europe and survive to this day. She is definitely one of the most hated queens in history, although she did not really do anything terrible. She did not have time to do anything, because she was ill most of her life. A beautiful widow from hell possessed the king and became his lover. Barbara Radziwill is the first known woman in history to be officially referred to by the word whore in the local language, which today is often replaced by a comma. Was the queen, whose pearls eventually ended up with Elizabeth Tudor only to be lost, who knows? Was she beautiful? A considerable simplification, and the research was conducted. When analyzing Barbara's appearance, you cannot be guided by portraits, as some do. Idealized 18th-century portraits do not reflect the canon of her beauty, and those created during her time are almost non-existent. Most were created after her death. Let's be frank, great artists, contrary to appearances, did not paint them, and already during Barbara's lifetime, trends of future Sarmatism began to appear in Polish art. It should be noted that the true Renaissance never reached Poland. This trend of art stopped in northern Germany and will not go beyond today's Bavaria, and even there it is strongly distorted. Political trends and lifestyle are a different matter. The fashion of depicting women at that time was not favorable to them. Facial features were deliberately aged to give women matronly features, and people were widened through clothing because it was believed that large garments gave greater dignity. In a sense, this referred to an old saying, not necessarily true. Fat does not mean healthy. In fact. The same was done with Anna Jagiellonian. Of course, István Báthory also contributed to shaping the legend of her ugliness. The king did not spare ironic remarks on this matter and spread it far and wide, creating a myth. Interestingly, the connoisseur of women, Henry III de Valois, who met Anna, never said anything like that about her, although he noted that she was an older woman. Báthory was a misogynist, as evidenced by the way he treated his cousin, also creating a legend. At the same time, he forgot about who brought him to the throne and thanks whom family finally achieved the position he dreamed of. Both he and the art of the time led to Anna being considered an eyesore for centuries. Today, thanks to facial reconstruction programs, we know that this was not the case. Both queens were of rather ordinary beauty. Studies conducted in the 1930s and 1950s on Barbara's body proved that she was a well-nourished woman and quite tall for her time. She was 160 meters tall. Today it is not much, but in those times people rarely reached more than 150 meters. All of her teeth have been preserved without cavities, and it is the condition of the teeth that is the best proof of whether we are healthy. Contrary to portraits, she was certainly a blonde. We can say nothing more about her appearance today. No reconstruction of Queen Barbara's face has been performed. What was that irritated in Barbara so much that she became the worst queen in history, even though she wasn't one at all, because she didn't have time to enjoy her power? There are many factors, and court rivalry and her mother-in-law contributed a lot to this. Let's try to take a more sober look at Barbara. Barbara was born from the union of George Radziwill with Barbara Coley, who should not be confused with Barbara Kiszka, George's first wife. George was considered a pious man, but according to the mentality of the times, he was a typical Renaissance man, and his morality was dual. Religion did not prevent him from committing extortion, forging documents and using all methods to increase his wealth. He was not the only one who did this, and many do it today. We can also see this ethical dualism in the behavior of Bona Sforza, and the best example is Ivan the Terrible, who in this respect surpassed all men of the era. In fact, all powerful families built their power in this way. Barbara's mother was a descendant of Elizabeth Pilecki, who was the wife of King Vladislaus Jogaila, so it is not entirely true that Barbara did not have good enough blood to be a queen. It is true that Pilecki did not bear the king any children. She was considered a very beautiful woman, and rumors of immoral conduct were spread about her, which were mainly created out of jealousy of the family's position. In addition to Barbara, this union also produced Nicholas and a daughter, Anna. After the death of their father, Nicholas, known as Red-Haired, was the legal guardian of the sisters. A rather mysterious scandal is associated with Anna. Initially, Anna was supposed to become the wife of Stanislaus Gotautas. However, for unexplained reasons, Radziwill somehow, as we would say, evaded this agreement, and the case even went to court. It is not known what caused the quarrel between George and the father of his fiancée, Albertus Gotautas, who in fact ruled Lithuania in the name of the king. George changed sides and betrothed his daughter to the son of Konstantin Ostrogowski, Ilya, and the Pope even issued a dispensation, because it was an Orthodox family. The Gotautas, on the other hand, were heading towards the Reformation. This alliance was intended to weaken the position of the Gotautas family. When the case went to the royal court, George proposed his younger daughter Barbara instead of Anna. This does not change the fact that Anna had two fiancés for some time. On October 20, 1536, an act was drawn up, on the basis of which a year later, on the same day, the wedding was to take place. However, Ilya rejected the proposal, because he was in love with Beata Kosiletsky. The case went to court again. This time, Radziwill filed a lawsuit accusing Ilya of breaking off the engagement and breaking her word. At the same time, he marries off his second daughter to Gotautas, whose father is, in a sense, the uncrowned king of Lithuania. This charade is strange. It seems that Radziwill wanted to force the Ostrovsky family at all costs to make one of their sons marry one of his daughters, and the only explanation for this peculiar circus is that he wanted to unite the three most powerful families of Lithuania in this way, in order to have complete influence on the fate of the country. The case ended favorably for Ilya, not for George. This was the first and last time that Sigismund the Old did not support the Radziwills. Only after Barbara became queen, the sister would become a wife of Peter Kiszka. The two sisters will not have much affection for each other, and Anna will not visit Barbara even on her deathbed. Perhaps Anna did have illegitimate children and Ilya did not feel like raising them. The Radziwills were not elevated to a higher rank by the coronation or Sigismund Augustus, but by his father and the Habsburgs, on whom the rulers, as vassals of the empire, were dependent if they wanted to maintain their international position. Initially, the Radziwills were the only family that fully supported Bona's policies, and she repaid them as she could. The family is virtually untouchable. Any complaints against the Radziwills, and there are plenty of them, are dismissed by the royal family. The Radziwills received the princely title from the Habsburgs, who at that time wanted to the favor of the Polish nobles in this way in the event of a future coronation. In this way, votes were bought, but the family would not use this title for many years to come. The reason for this is quite simple. During the lifetime of the last Jagiellonians, this title means little. The Polish ruler could only sign under this decision. Why was this done? Well, rumors are circulating around the world and the Habsburgs are perfectly aware that Augustus is infertile, and even if a miracle were to happen, it is good to have a princess in a family whose ally is the most powerful man in Europe next to Henry VIII. The one who deals the cards in the game. of course, we are talking about Suleiman the Magnificent, and then his son Selim too, who, contrary to appearances in his youth, was not such a weakling. However, it is not his myths that we are debunking today. Suleiman has had political alliance with last Jagiellonians. Relations with the Radzivills deteriorated after the wedding or perhaps due to a certain incident. It is possible that Bona, through the hands of the Radzivills, caused Sigismund the Old to entrust power in Lithuania to his son. August became the true king of Lithuania, and Sigismund the Old kept the formal title of Supremus. This is one of the assumptions on this subject, and the second is the beginning of August's rebellion against his mother's sick love. It is known that the Radzivills, in exchange for supporting him in this matter, secretly received money from the prince, and along with it, Gostautas, who were connected with the Radziwills through Barbara. This fact proves that, contrary to legends, this was not a royal family that loved each other very much. Perhaps it was during this period that Zygmunt met his future wife, but this is just a guess. Everything would have been fine if the Radzivills and August had not tried to deprive Queen Bona of some profitable estates that she had received in the border areas as a wedding gift. This conflict led to a serious family conflict and could have influenced Bona's attitude towards her future daughter-in-law. Bona was a typical Sforza, often compared to Katerina Sforza, a female condottiere, and there is little exaggeration in that, and Augustus was her equal. It was a kind of explosive mix of genes that had to lead to a war between these two strong personalities. The queen comes from a family of outstanding condottieri who had won the Duchy of Milan for themselves with murder and rape. People who were famous for their cruelty. She is also related to the de Aragon family, which was also not a saint, and her aunt is Lucrezia Borgia herself. The Radzivills of that time should not be viewed from the perspective of later times. They are not patrons of the arts, nor outstanding scholars, although they are far from ignorant. Ordinary average noblemen like many, only more resourceful and rich, and this is also painful for many. If anyone could have introduced Barbara to Sigismund Augustus, it was her cousin Nicholas Black, who was a faithful companion of the prince in his love affairs. There is no point in officially ordaining the last king of the Jagiellonian dynasty. He was not a faithful spouse, just like his father, who officially kept a mistress at court. Catherine Telnich de Hochstadt bore Sigismund the Old a son, John, and several daughters, and the king married her to treasurer Kosiletsky. The fact that lordships did not decide on the dynastic continuation through this branch of the family is mainly due to the cruel legal legislation towards bastards that existed in Poland at that time. The court of Sigismund the Old was also not virtuous. Henry VIII took noblewomen as wives and no one was bothered by it. Mary Stuart also married a prince from her lands. The reference by some authors in the matter of marriage to a constitutional monarchy is quite strange, simply they forget about those. It was not a country with such a legal system, and the example of England and Scotland shows that such a marriage was certainly possible. These are only the beginnings of a system that will somewhat resemble a constitutional monarchy, but in reality it will be one big chaos, and the rulers would be prisoners of idiots. However, the parliament did not yet have enough influence at that time to decide who the king should share his bed with. Prudery in this matter would not be imposed even on the British until the 19th century. The problem was that lordships had long since stopped fearing the ruler, and therefore had stopped respecting and obeying him. The Renaissance era was very sexually liberated, and many perversions were even acceptable. These were the times of famous courtesans and erotic performances. It is not without reason that it is called the era of pornography. No other times were so saturated with eroticism and will never be. It was in these times that pornography was born, as well as sadism. Donatien de Chaudet only described sadism, but certainly did not invent it, masochism and many other phenomena analyzed today by psychiatrists. Most moralists writing about Barbara Radziwill come from the 19th century, and this was a time of exceptional sexual hypocrisy, a complete tilt in the other direction. An era that was able to support that children are born from cabbage, and people were able to take it for granted. Critics of Barbara's contemporaries were mainly loyal to Bona and slandered her at the behest of the rejected queen, and still others were mentally stuck in the Middle Ages, which had by no means abandoned Poland at that time. Interestingly, no one will moralize Jan Sobieski for Marie Casimir, and the situation is virtually identical. No one moralized Sigismund the Old either, and this is an even worse story, because the king did not want to marry for years because of his mistress and a dynastic problem arose. No one will moralize August for Barbara Radziwill either, and this is the story we are heading to. The king will give up the ghost in front of the woman he wanted to marry, and her influence on politics was greater than that of the Radziwills. So when reading about Barbara, we must bear all this in mind. The mutual attitude of Lithuanians and Poles towards each other also influenced how Barbara was perceived. The union of Poland with Lithuania was not a success for either side, and what Hedwig and Jogaila managed to work out was lost with their deaths. This is still difficult subject for both sides. The next rulers either did not want or did not see the sparking conflicts between the two nations. The Poles were not saints in this matter, just like the Lithuanians. These aversions and stereotypes of perceiving each other will lead to partitions in a few hundred years. The Polish nobility very quickly forgot that they too were once the proverbial calf in European courts. Lithuanians were treated with disdain, if only because of their short family genealogy and very late adoption of Christianity. This in turn irritated the Lithuanians, who demanded equal treatment. We must also mention the position of women in both countries, which is completely different and does not result from, as some would have it, the natural promiscuity of Lithuanians, but from the way they were raised and influenced. Attributing national promiscuity is repeating an old lampoon. Lithuania was a country where the influences of the Orthodox Church and Catholicism clashed, and these two parties perceived the role of women and sexuality in a completely different way. Europe at that time was, contrary to appearances, diverse. Western influences did not reach Scandinavia, Russia or the Balkans. Scandinavia was mentally stuck in the Romanesque era, and Russia and the Balkans were diverse thanks to the Orthodox Church, although the social lowlands were very deeply in the Middle Ages. Any influences of the Renaissance stopped in Poland. In the first half of the 16th century, most Lithuanians were still strongly influenced by pagan cults. Superstition and love of the occult were also spreading in Poland, and Sigismund Augustus himself brought Dhur. The baptism of Poland was a symbolic act that concerned only Mieszko and a few trusted courtiers, and the rest of the people still waited a long time to bathe in the water. It was similar in Lithuania, and the change of beliefs and perception of the world required much more time. The position of women among the Balts was always strong, just like among the Vikings. Slavs, Vikings, and Balts have always been famous for their erotic freedom, and the position of a woman depended on the contacts they had with the Germanic nations. The Romans wrote about it with undisguised distaste. Virgins were not valued as in most ancient countries that have NP dealings with Rome, although later the Church supported something else, and what is worse, many still take it for truth. The reason for such behavior was quite simple, like the lack of monogamy in the desert. By marrying a widow or any woman with children, a man was sure that he would have an heir. In the case of a virgin, there is no such certainty and will not have it. It was Rome that cared so much about virtue, but only in women. Men did whatever they wanted, offering gifts of venereal diseases. Sexual intercourse became shameful and possible only for procreation. Latin Christianity declared an effective war on sexuality, in contrast to the Orthodox Church, which did not treat it as something perverted, but quite the opposite, which does not mean that it approved of sexual relations with whomever and wherever. It was a church rooted in the Eastern tradition, not the Roman one. Although there were not always borders on the map of the Roman Empire, since the beginning of history it was a state divided into East and West. What was near Rome was ossified and hardened. What was in the East used Greek as the official language and allowed much more. A man like Jesus would not survive a day in the city of Rome, nor in the Latin sphere of influence, but in the East it was. There all philosophical and religious trends were worshipped. The Latin Church was supposed to have ossified in this matter forever, while the Orthodox Church allowed divorces and the possession of wives by inferior priests. The best proof of this is the fact that when Sigismund Augustus brought back the legendary tapestries, clothes were sewn onto the naked figures. The Polish court also had no shortage of debauchery, but unlike the Lithuanian nobility, their magnates did it in a more secretive way. However, living on the border of the influences of both churches, the Lithuanians approached it more freely and saw no need to legally allow the murder of bastards, as was done in Poland, or to hide love affairs under the carpet. This was to change in time when the Latin Church settled there for good. Women in Lithuania have the right to inherit property and dispose of it, while in Poland, in accordance with the Western lifestyle approved by the Church, they do not have it. As usual, everyone in their hypocrisy forgot that it takes two to do it and, surprisingly, in the 21st century, this is still forgotten. However, not everyone liked this virtue in women, because Hieronym Łaski already mentions that he demanded something from God for greater warmth for Polish women. The approach to incest is also different. Marriage with a stepmother was considered incest in Poland, although it is not incest at all. This changed quite recently. In Lithuania, the so-called betrothal still functions, which has already come out of Polish customs. In the era of the Renaissance, women in Poland play a small role. They have no chance of development unless they are princesses. In this respect, Poland is indeed ahead of Lithuania, because in these matters it shows a close connection with the culture instilled by the Roman Church. However, Barbara was raised in an environment where this influence was still weak. Perhaps the funniest insult against her is that she used the baths. Even Sigismund Augustus complains about it. Of course, it was a very good habit, which also prevented many more common venereal diseases than syphilis, which was popular at that time. A habit that, unlike the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church did not prohibit. It may seem funny, but Bernard of Clairvaux wrote extensively about the fact that a decent Christian rarely washes. Barbara receives a fairly good education. She has a private tutor and is not characterized by gluttony like, for example, Queen Bona, who gave a fortune to imported delicacies from Italy and had difficulty fitting through the passages. She had an excellent command of the Polish language, both spoken and written, which was rare even among Polish noblewomen of that time, because court spoke in German or Latin. She does not speak Latin, but Nicholas Ray himself lamented the popularity of this language in her time. It was thanks to her that the Polish court began to use Polish, and it seems that Sigismund Augustus fully approved of this idea. During her coronation, the official speech was also spoken in Polish for the first time. She often visited Vilnius. She was accused of excessive religious tolerance, but at that time in the Jagiellonian state this should not have come as a surprise. This is another malicious act. This may irritate the Polish nobility, because Sarmatian trends were beginning to appear. The truth is that Polish moralists condemned all behaviors and values other than theirs. They did not want to understand the differences in Lithuanian customs, and Barbara became a victim of this. She was also not a woman who stood quietly in the corner and made her own judgments. She could be explosive, and this trait may not have won her friends, especially since the illness intensified this trait. She is a woman who was simply too emancipated to be a queen, but she was certainly never as calculating and hypocritical in her behavior as Elizabeth Woodville, rightly called the English rabbit. A woman who did everything to have power. Together with her mother, she tricked King Edward into marriage, and whenever her husband tried to leave her, she got pregnant again, went as far as murdering her family's opponents, and whenever her ground burned, she could only hide in the crypt. Barbara could be extravagant, that's true, but let's not forget that Sigismund Augustus was too. If he had not embezzled his sister Anna's dowry, her life would have turned out differently, although her behavior could have influenced on his decision. This is a blow indirectly aimed at Bona. The circle of animosity between the two nations was closing, and the rulers were doing nothing about it. Both sides in this bitterness brought about the defeat of their nations. Barbara's first marriage to Stanislaus Gostaudas was quite short. No children were born from this union, and the family died out. Was Barbara promiscuous? If so, she was no more promiscuous than all noblemen of Renaissance era. There is really no evidence of this, but there is evidence of her husband's promiscuousness. She was widowed very young, so she could have had some affairs. The numbers of lovers given by historians of the time, or the theory that she slept with stable boys, should not be taken seriously. Barbara's entire life shows that she knew her position and would certainly not have looked at a stable boy as an object of interest, and the calculations are another lampoon. Sigismund Augustus was raised according to Italian trends, which did not please the Polish nobility. Italians were responsible for his education, thanks to which in a sense he became a true Renaissance man who liked art and science, but could also be cruel and sexually promiscuous. Worse still, he was not introduced to the secrets of power. He only gained this knowledge as a king, to his own misfortune. His possessive mother completely distanced him from his father, who had almost no influence on his son's upbringing. At the age of 19, the prince suffered from some disease that made him infertile. From the descriptions, it can be concluded that it was mumps. Suggestions of gonorrhea are unlikely. He inherited the worst and the best traits from his parents. The worst ones, typically Italian, from his mother, who had a huge influence on her son's entire life. In a sense, the relationship between Bona and Sigismund is a typical Jocasta syndrome. It is a mother and mother-in-law from the worst nightmares, who creates a mama's boy who thinks that he is allowed to do anything. Sigismund was a sickly favored child, while daughters practically did not exist for Bona, and were in fact evidence of her defeat. They were only a bargaining chip in marriages, and none of them, apart from Isabella Zapolya, was happy. Bona Sforza completely forgot about future King Anne. After many years, Catherine became the wife of the King of Sweden, who abused her mentally and physically. Sophie quickly became a widower and was the only one to openly become a Lutheran. Bona spoiled her son and devoted her entire life exclusively to him. Already in Augustus' times, it was noted that she provided her son with a womanly upbringing. This is quite strange behavior on the part of a woman who suffered so much in childhood precisely because she was born a girl. One might get the impression that her daughters disgust her. In a sense, Sigismund is a typical Sforza. He is an egocentric, suspicious man who knows how to use a dagger when necessary. Officially, he is a Catholic, but he does not condemn other faiths. He loves hunting, horses and expensive jewelry. He treats his subjects in the Italian style. They are servants and he cares little about their fate. He is not interested in the deprivations of the poor, the natural disasters that are tearing the country apart, or epidemics, and there will be many of them. He lives in his own closed world, and his mother constantly cleanses his life path of all dangers. As a result, he is not allowed to grow up and will not prepare him to be the ruler of this country. Bona seems to have forgotten that being a prince in Poland, where the nobility has a lot to say, is not enough. She creates a man who would do well on one of the Italian thrones, but not here. Bona never hid the fact that she looks at the Polish nobility as bloodthirsty, backward savages, and that is why she did not allow anyone from Poland to educate her son. The country was certainly mentally stuck in the Middle Ages, but Sforza herself has nothing to boast about. Bona also forgot the most important thing: she was supposed to create a king for Poland, not for an Italian duchy. She is to blame for his further failures. The effect of her upbringing will be very quickly visible, for example in the fact that Sigismund will not support his sisters, and they will not support him. Marriages that were supposed to ensure alliances will not give anything. The prince is spoiled, and as soon as he complains to his mother about someone, that person must expect severe punishment or even leaving the court. His whims are immediately fulfilled. He was surrounded by many women, some of whom were sent to him by his mother. At the age of 17, he had an affair with 38-year-old Diana di Cordona, who received a house from him. Perhaps, following the example of Italian courts, his mother sent him an older woman to introduce him to erotic art. We also know of an affair with a girl named Weiss, Jewish. Something that wouldn't be acceptable on others' courts. From his youth, the ruler considered it natural to keep numerous concubines and did not hide it. He had more women than Selim too. His first wife was Elizabeth von Habsburg. The comments that German women sat on the Polish throne and this is a quagmire that should never have crossed Polish borders, are quite funny. The person writing such comments forgets that at that time, marriage to the Habsburgs was an international prestige, and that they are not Germans, and the difference in manners between the two nations is also huge today. It is not a successful relationship, and the true character of Sigismund is revealed very quickly, as he oppresses his wife. Elizabeth was considered a saint, and this bothered her husband. She is a mentally retarded woman suffering from epilepsy, but in the case of this line of Habsburgs, this is not surprising. The Habsburgs are an old family. They marry among themselves, and this leads to numerous genetic diseases. The rigorously brought-up princess had no idea what to do with a husband who was fond of eroticism, and this caused Augustus disgust. The man humiliated her in the presence of the servants and perfidiously forced her to march with the courtiers to the royal bed, after which he pointed out to everyone her lack of skills. A perversion characteristic of the Sforza family. Already in August's times, the fate of Elizabeth was lamented, as her husband quickly abandoned her and began to cheat on her. The mother, who punishes her daughters severely for the slightest offense, sees nothing wrong with this behavior, and on the contrary, joins in. Wherever she can, she spreads the news that the Habsburgs have forced her son to marriage with a cripple and does everything to make Elizabeth's life miserable. Perhaps she subconsciously blamed the Radzywills for this cripple. They were responsible for the wedding treaties. The most famous attack by her mother-in-law is the dispute over Parmesan. In reality, Bona and Zygmunt can only blame themselves and the ambassadors for sending the cripple. They did not ask and check everything properly. This is a story similar to that of Anna de Cleves, although Henry later wanted to take her as his wife again, appreciating the good heart of this woman. The arrival of Barbara in Sigismund's life coincides with the moment when he finally decides to grow up and break away from the will of his despotic mother. August cannot be blamed for wanting to emerge from the shadow of Queen Bona and manage his own life. Who is increasingly encircling him? The Radziwills were the most important part of the prince's court in Lithuania and supported him in his policy of independence from the family. Then Bona, like Valide Sultan, loses everything if her son would withdraws. Of course, the story that Sigismund, led by news of the widow's beauty, went to the town of Jerenana, where the woman resided, and fell in love at first sight, can be considered a fairy tale. The meeting was certainly arranged, and perhaps the couple had met earlier, when Barbara was suing the Gostaudas family for her husband's inheritance. Nicholas the Black did not do this. Then perhaps Bona did it unconsciously by mentioning the trial, because at that time she was still very favorable to the Radziwills. Sigismund starts an affair with Barbara, but this does not prevent him from keeping quite a large court of concubines, who will be dismissed only when his wife goes to Vilnius. Despite this, the affair with Barbara will flourish. Elizabeth's premature death suits everyone, and it is vain to expect signs of mourning for her at the Polish court. Initially, Barbara and Sigismund enjoyed an open relationship. August repeatedly emphasized that he did not intend to marry Barbara, and that she liked the role of mistress. After Elizabeth's death, Barbara moves permanently to Vilnius. The Radziwill residence is located next to the residence of the Grand Duke, and soon both buildings will be connected by a secret passage. Barbara is also a regular guest at the hunting residence in Rudninkai. Barbara as a mistress did not bother Queen Bona that much, but the queen decided to interfere in her son's life again and began searching for a new wife. The queen decided to marry her son to Zofia Hohenzollern, the daughter of Prince Albrecht. It seems that the prince learned about these plans from the German ambassador, as his reaction may indicate. He was certainly not delighted with such an attitude of his mother. In a sense, he was already an independent ruler and a widower. He had the right to look for a wife himself, and his mother had nothing to do with it. Sigismund was treated like a small child and had the right to feel offended. Let's not forget about how the queen raised her son. In a moment, it would start to backfire on her. Around 1547, Nicholas the Black changed his policy towards his cousin's relationship. He is, in a sense, the pimp in this story, and Barbara will be subject to his will until the end. It is not known what he knew about her, but whatever connected them must have been strong, because the woman will remain under his influence forever and will never be able to free herself from him. While she managed to distance her entire family, and after marrying the king she even did not allow her fellow men near her, Nicholas the Black will always remain in her shadow. It is not true that the wedding made the family all-powerful. Barbara did everything to keep them away from the court. The Radziwills began to notice that the king's attitude towards the woman was different than towards his previous toys. While Barbara was not interested in getting married, the cousin and brother suddenly became sensitive about the honor of their family. This was emotional blackmail mainly towards Barbara. The blackmail did not work very well, because Sigismund stopped seeing his mistress. The ruler began to look for a wife at the courts and may have started another affair. It is not true that the king was caught in a secret rendezvous with Barbara by her family and forced into marriage. These are not yet the times when Radziwill can order the ruler what to do in such matters. The wedding is solely Sigismund's decision. These fairy tales are a form of justifying his decision in the eyes of others and in a sense another lampoon. The couple certainly did not plan it from the beginning. It is very difficult to determine the actual date of the wedding. It is certain that it was not a wedding of necessity, but of love. August believed that in this matter he had the right to decide about his life himself. Barbara was simply the ideal woman for him. She had a tough character, was not completely submissive, and on top of that she was good in bed and there was plenty to talk about with her. They liked the same entertainment and books. These two simply suited each other. The Polish nobility and beloved mother, however, think differently. The noblemen forgot that it was not up to them to decide about it. After all, Sigismund the Old was already, in a sense, a hostage of the noble assemblies. During the free election would the lords get in their head when they were able to choose a king? The wedding was, in a sense, an attempt to free himself from the despotic mother, or perhaps a reaction to her choosing a wife. It was also not a wedding because of pregnancy. Barbara certainly did not get pregnant, but certain symptoms may indicate the beginning of a future illness. After a few months, Augustus set off to Poland to prepare the ground for announcing the news to the world. Barbara moved to Dubonii for this period. It was a difficult time. She was actually imprisoned, surrounded by guards, and could not leave the residence. She began to become eccentric and may have developed a neurosis. The king did not forget his wife, sending her affectionate letters and gifts, but Barbara was truly lonely at this time and lived in constant fear that someone might kill her. It is from this period that strange reports of irregular menstrual cycles appear. For a moment, Barbara thinks she is pregnant. Unlikely after mumps. Augustus left no children. He was certainly infertile. Perhaps they both were. After more than a year, Barbara left the castle to go to Vilnius to meet the king. Some time ago, Sigismund the Old died, and her son officially took over the reins of government in both countries. Did Sigismund the Old really reprimand his son in a letter for secretly marrying Barbara, or did Bona replace the ailing king? The fact is that after the wedding, the couple separated for over a year, only to meet for 13 days and then separate again. The marriage was officially announced after Sigismund the Old's death, and Augustus even took out a loan from Fugger himself to pay supporters who were to speak on the matter at the parliament session. Perhaps the old ailing king never found out about his son's marriage. Much news passed through Bona at the end of his life. The queen could have sent a letter on her husband's behalf. Such a mother certainly had her spies in her son's closest circle. We know that she became hysterical upon hearing about the relationship with Barbara. She claimed that this decision led to her husband's death, which is not true. She behaved completely like she was not herself. She threw herself on the bed, cursed, threatened, called upon all evil forces, sobbed. Bona went completely crazy. A narcissistic mother and a narcissistic son. The war between these two is really the beginning of the path of the country they rule to disappearing from the map. She very quickly informed the other members of the family about this filthy event, not sparing vulgar words in her letters, which simply would unbecoming the queen, especially the one she wanted to be considered. This is an obvious example of the Jocasta syndrome. Let's not forget that the first wife of Sigismund the Old, Barbara Zapolia, was also not of royal descent. It was a misalliance and was also treated as a scandal. It is doubtful that the father, who had previously done the same, would have blasphemed his son so much in his letters. Even before announcing his relationship to the world, the king sent Nicholas the Black to Poland to recruit supporters who would approve of the marriage. The union was supported by people who were at odds with Bona, such as Hetman Tarnowski. The wealthy nobility did not take sides, waiting for future events. The real shouting is from the nobles associated with the Habsburgs and those who did not have a penny to their name, who receive money for their quarrelsomeness from the highest bidder, but have no idea why they do it. It is not true that the news of the wedding was received well in Lithuania. The nobility also did not approve of the relationship, but people remained silent out of respect for the royal position. The opposition was not as open as in Poland, where although it was not written law, the rulers consulted the parliament regarding the wedding. The fact that too much freedom for the nobility was one of the worst things that could happen to Poland is known to everyone from history. The behavior of the lords, and in particular the so-called naked nobility, towards the wedding of Sigismund August is a prelude to future events that will have terrible consequences for the country. The noblemen preferred a woman from abroad than one in any way connected with Poland, because they did not have to fear her influence on the ruler's policy, and consequently fear for their privileges. At first, their opposition was caused solely by political aspects, but over time by fear for their own benefits. Some feared equal rights for Lithuanian nobility with Polish. Many were, in the pocket, of the Habsburgs, especially the lords of Greater Poland. Some actually thought that the wedding would reduce the dynastic prestige. The nobles of Greater Poland tried to use the marriage to transfer power to the Habsburgs. The Gorka family, associated with Kornik, led the way, as they were dependent on their money. They led to an uprising against the king, financed by the Habsburgs, which Sigismund August put down by force of arms. The hatred was fueled by Bona and her supporters. The queen decided to demonstratively leave the capital before the arrival of their daughter-in-law and took their daughters with them to Warsaw, where they maintained contact with the opposition to their son and did everything to fuel hatred wherever and however they could. Stanislaus Orzechowski and Nicholas Ray, financed by Bona, created the worst lampoons. Not only did they decline the words harlot or whore by variety by cases, but they were even able to write that Barbara was the illegitimate daughter of Sigismund the Old. Orzechowski even goes so far as to say that from now on all widows would live dissolutely like a queen. It was he who, with his pen, convinced his countrymen that the country would fall as soon as the world found out about the marriage. Bona's hostility towards both wives arouses suspicions in August that she could have helped Elizabeth leave this world. Sigismund Augustus begins to fear for his own life, which he writes about in his letters. The figure of Bona hangs over the marriage like a shadow, although the two women will never meet. The queen loses the war to be the only one in her son's heart. Only after Barbara's death will she meet her son, vainly hoping that he will fall into her arms. The First Piotrków Parliament is a kind of farce and a tussle between the two sides. In reality, the king left the nobles arguing with each other to themselves and left the city. This move shows August's intelligence. Barbara came to the capital without the approval of the parliament. Only the Third Parliament will recognize her as August's wife, mainly thanks to bribes for the naked nobility, and another outstanding move. Namely, August sent his trusted ambassador to the Habsburgs with an offer they could not refuse. He will not support his sister Isabella Zapolia in Hungary and fully supports the Habsburgs in their actions in Hungary in exchange for the recognition of the marriage. This is quite a treat for the Habsburgs, who dream of Hungary. The Habsburgs will enter into this arrangement without hesitation, and the screamers disappear as if by magic. At the same time, they realize that August cannot be manipulated and change their minds about him even in private letters. Isabella Zapolia is abandoned by her family. Suleiman the Magnificent will come to her aid only because of his good relations with her father. After this game, Bona decides to meet with her son. She uses Sophie's illness as an excuse, which she believes may be caused by spinsterhood. It is doubtful that the queen will understand that she has neglected the future of her daughters, because thanks to her Sophie will not find a husband. Unfortunately, she has already destroyed family relations and her son will not meet her. Barbara is often accused of hypocrisy, because she addresses her husband in a very formal way in her letters. Barbara knew perfectly well that her husband was a ruler, and that his correspondence was not always read by him. In this way, in accordance with the era, she expressed respect for his position. Even Harem or Hira Kunwari addressed their spouses in this way, and they had a much stronger position. Barbara never wanted a crown for herself, quite the opposite. The role of a wife or mistress was enough for her, and Nicholas the Black sought this trinket, who in his letters reprimanded the queen for her passivity and lack of pressure on the king in this matter. In time, August himself began to insist on the coronation, wanting to rub the noses of the nobles in this way and show them who the king was. The coronation was not the queen's triumph, because it was actually carried out against the mood of society. If anyone triumphed here, it was Nicholas the Black and August. Perhaps it would not have happened at all, if not for the zeal of Bona and the lords. This whole circus with the coronation shows the character of Sigismund Augustus and Bona. The Sejm and Senate did not give their consent to it, but let us emphasize this once again. In reality, he had no right to discuss this topic, because the king voluntarily asked him for advice and it was not a written law. The bishops also stood in the way of the coronation, but they had their own interests in it. Sigismund Augustus quickly calmed the situation by issuing an edict in which he forbade the followers of new trends of Christianity from being admitted to high offices and recognized only Catholicism as the national religion. This was a turn in politics, and the bishops took advantage of the moment, rightly fearing that the Reformation could drive them out of Poland and Lithuania. In reality, at this point the king could no longer abandon his chosen path, because the nobles would tear him to pieces. The coronation was his triumph over the nobility, proving to the magnates and his loving mother that he was the ruler of this country. He is the last ruler in history who will manage to show who's in charge. For Barbara herself, this is an uncomfortable, even stalemate situation. The woman is already seriously ill, so the date of the coronation had to be postponed. The legendary Veil of Pearls is very real, but the entire setting of the day was subordinated to another, much more important event. Namely, Barbara's coronation was combined with a feudal homage by the Prussian prince, which had not yet taken place after Augustus took the throne. This is not the same Prussian homage that took place during the time of Sigismund the Old. This was the first and last state ceremony in which Barbara took part. Sigismund was very thrifty in these matters. He liked to squander money on himself and his loved ones, but not necessarily on strangers. Typical Italian. Right after the coronation, the queen became very ill and would never recover. Upon hearing of her imminent death, Queen Bona and her daughters send a letter to Augustus and Barbara, wanting to reconcile with them. This is a ploy of the queen, who by no means intends to forgive either her son or his wife. She sees this as her only chance to return to favor and regain control over her son. She secretly sends word to the de Valois family to marry her son off to one of the French princesses and create a powerful opposition to the Habsburgs together with France and the Ottomans. The plan is truly brilliant, but she has forgotten that the delicate bond with her son has been lost and is making the same mistake again. She is not the one deciding on the marriage. Sigismund only agrees to the arrival of his mother's envoy. He consciously informs all the courtiers about this proposal and even makes this news public, noting that he is afraid of Bona poisoning him or his wife. It is possible that Sigismund really thought or knew that Bona helped Elizabeth leave this world. After all she had done, he certainly began to fear her. After all, he was a beloved pet, whom his mother allowed to do whatever he wanted, and her mother suddenly turned her back on him. The meeting takes place in the court environment so that the envoy could not be alone with Barbara. At the same time, the enemies spread increasingly worse rumors upon hearing about the queen's illness. In fact, it is during this period that the masks fall from the faces. Uterine cancer is ridiculed by everyone, emphasizing that it is the fault of Barbara's debauchery and the country will finally be free from the harlot. What is worse, this myth has survived in the erotic consciousness of both nations. Unfortunately, cancer is not that simple. Nuns also suffer from it. Sigismund is left alone with his sick wife, because his former supporters are also disappearing. As befits a good husband, Augustus takes care of his wife and stays by her bedside. He behaves completely differently towards Barbara than he did towards Elizabeth. If Sigismund loved anyone apart from himself, it was only Barbara, and he really had to take care of a wreck. The symptoms of the disease do not suggest syphilis, as some books claim. It would have developed much earlier, and Augustus himself would have received a gift. Meanwhile, the king, as well as his later wives and mistresses, do not show symptoms of this disease. In the Renaissance era, syphilis is a very popular disease among the nobility, but it is treated with mercury with quite good results. Yes, it has its side effects, but this fact would have been recorded. There is no mention of this. The official cause of death made public by the court regarding Barbara's death was cancer, and this was already well known many hundreds of years before the Queen. There is no need to doubt this diagnosis, and all descriptions of her disease only confirm it. Imaginary pregnancies, which could have been the result of irregular menstruation caused by cancer and hemorrhages, are the best evidence. The most adequate and most frequently given diagnosis is cancer of the reproductive organs, probably hormone deficiency, which certainly influenced Barbara's changing behavior towards the end of her life. In fact, only one book gives syphilis as the cause of death, and it is not very respected by historians, although it secured sales with a new thesis. Barbara certainly did not have the strength to ask her husband to remarry. This is a fairy tale created by later historians. It is certain that she always wanted to be buried in Vilnius. She was fed up with Krakow, where she could not even go out into the street without hearing epithets addressed to her. In this city, she was hounded, but not by Sigismund but by the residents and courtiers. Besides, it was in Vilnius that she spent her best years with Sigismund. The king agreed to this request and, interestingly, he himself also wanted to be buried with Barbara. This request of your majesty, gentlemen, the nobility and the nation have not been fulfilled to this day. On the 25th of August 1551 Barbara was laid to rest in the Vilnius cathedral. After her death, the king changed. If previously he was not interested in state affairs, now they stopped caring at all. He ordered Barbara's belongings to be stored with great care, creating in a sense a private museum of his wife. In this respect, his story is similar to the story of Suleiman. The Sultan also never forgot his wife, and during the mourning, power in the country was taken over by Mirima and Gulfem, who was the Sultan's second Cadin. A few weeks after the funeral, he married Elizabeth's sister, Catherine. It was a dynastic marriage and a renewal aimed at the machinations of his mother. If previously Sigismund was dissolute, now he became a true sybarite. He created a practically private harem, which did not leave him for a moment. Catherine had only to accept it, which she did. It would be appropriate to mention now the legendary mirror, Master Twardowski and the king's last lover, who according to the latest research was the ruler's morganatic wife, Barbara Radziwill. A mysterious woman who, like Ildiko, was a copy of the deceased Barbara. Today we know who was the popular in fairy tales and legends Mr. Twardowski, also known as Faust in Germany, and in reality Laurentius Dhur. 2, and for sure one of his mirrors can still be admired, and let's hope it remains so, because in a sense it is a symbol of the hypocritical nature of man. In fact, 3 mirrors were created. The one in Sandomierz is unfortunately no longer exhibited, and the one in Lorem Mine was embedded in the frame of another mirror. In Poland, we can only admire the mirror in Wiegrove, and its frame tells the story of what it was used for. So let's move on to the epilogue of Sigismund Augustus' love story and the summoning of the spirit, as well as the perfidious exploitation of the king's suffering by the Mniszek family, who decided to compete with the Radzywills for influence at court. In Poland they will not succeed, but in Russia they will try to convince that Dmitri was resurrected 3 times. This is age of famous great Smuda. Dhur was certainly not a sane person, but he was also an example of an exceptionally intelligent and cunning schizophrenic, psychopath, and several other illnesses can be seen. Of all the mental illnesses, apart from schizophrenia, he can also be accused of necromancy. Unfortunately others have not been proven. Contrary to appearances, he was an educated man who studied with Martin Luther and Paracelsus. However, they did not go the same way. Krasinski studied with them at the same time, and he was the only person who could bring Dhur to Poland. However, Dhur did not complete his studies, and after many years he transferred to the Krakow Academy. Initially, he worked in Germany, where he engaged in the then fashionable art of predicting the future and creating horoscopes. He even did this for the emperor himself in Nuremberg, where he was born. In 1534, Dhur became the head of the Anabaptist sect, which took control of the city of Munster, brutally murdering the inhabitants of any other faith, and the city was declared the New Jerusalem. It was a rather filthy Jerusalem, where orgy reigned supreme. At the beginning of 1535, the city was conquered and Faust fled. It is not known when he entered the service of Nicholas the Black, and then to the Mniszek. He was either brought to Poland by Bishop Francis Krasinski, or he came from Prussia with the prince, which could be confirmed by the places he stayed in. Dhur was a man who served only himself. At first, he became only a royal equerry, but quickly climbed the ranks, and for his services he received a tenement house and a palace from the king. The king's mourning was to everyone's advantage, because after Barbara's death, Sigismund was truly devastated, and thanks to this he signed everything that the nobility gave him. The court exploited this in a brutal way and did everything to keep the ruler in this state. The Mniszek used this moment to Perfection, because Nicholas Manichet from a valet became the guardian of the king's treasury. He fulfilled this duty so perfectly that together with his relatives he reduced the king's fortune for his own needs. It is difficult to say who initially paid Dhur, whether only Krasinski, and then Nicholas the Black or the Manichet family, or maybe everyone paid. It is hard to believe that Nicholas the Black had pangs of conscience after Barbara's death, but he certainly lost a lot and wanted to remain with the king. However, the matter got out of control, and when it came to light, it ended badly for everyone. Dhur was supposed to summon the spirit of the deceased Barbara, but a number of things made his work difficult, including August himself. Dhur's mirrors are truly enchanting, if only because it is not entirely clear what metal alloy was used, but they have never really been studied well. They are most commonly referred to as white Japanese mirrors, which are mostly silver. They do not concentrate magical powers, but they were made in a magical way, namely on each of the many hundreds of layers an engraving was created, which in its entirety created a certain composition, and different figures appeared depending on the angle of sunlight falling on the mirror. The mirror was made in a similar way to a Japanese or Korean sword, by placing thin layers one on top of the other. This is the only very scientific magic of mirrors, pure physics and the artistry of the creator. Mirrors are like magic postcards popular in the previous era, which were popular in the 70s and changed the image, depending on the movement of the photo. So we can see the devil in it, as well as a lady in white, who may resemble Queen Barbara or the Virgin Mary, or a damned soul. Unfortunately, in the 19th century the mirror was damaged and some of its properties disappeared. It is not known where the first séance took place, whether it was Krakow or Warsaw. During the séance, the king was supposed to sit on a chair and not move, and also remain silent no matter what he saw. It seems that the first time only a mirror was used, but the king wanted to spend more time with his wife, and over time this desire and belief in the spirit became morbid, which each of the courtiers used in their own way. Here Barbara Giza appears, being the daughter of Jan Giza, a writer, a Warsaw burgher, a merchant and above all a usurer, to whom many were indebted. The family, like Dhur, came from Franconia, so he himself could have asked for help. Barbara Giza was deceptively similar to the queen, and whoever had this idea in their head was really cunning, quite cruel and sly. In the castle in Krakow, a woman began to appear and disappear looking like Barbara Radziwill dying in bed. The courtiers really began to believe that the queen wanted revenge from beyond the grave, and many of them trembled with fear. In any case, during the next session, not only a mirror was used, perhaps out of fear of the lack of good light. A young woman dressed in the costume of the dying Barbara Radziwill entered the stage. The plan would probably have succeeded if not for the fact that Giza played the role so credibly that at one point Sigismund Augustus threw himself at her and began to embrace her passionately. At that moment the king understood that he was not dealing with a ghost at all, but with a living person. The Manichet family fled as far as possible to their estates in the territory of today's Ukraine, but then Poland, where Sigismund for some reason did not pursue them. This was quite strange of him, and one can only argue that both sides know too much about each other. The family will remind about themselves in Russia, where Nicholas's granddaughter, Marina, will become the Tsarina and wife of a man who will die and rise from the dead 3 times. The Manicheks have definitely forgotten that the same joke is not funny twice, and while Sigismund August treated them really gently, because they practically voluntarily left the court, the Russians will not be so polite. Laurentius hastily followed them, visiting his fairy tale residence near Warsaw on the way and giving the mirror to Francis Krasinski, to whom he gave it from Sandomierz is unknown. However, Sigismund Augustus could not allow someone like that to walk the earth, and the Manicheks no longer wanted to keep a witness to their deed alive, just like Barbara Giza. The king rightly felt cheated. He had the right to curse and reproach that his feelings had been exploited, which he did. Perhaps he had reconsidered something. He supposedly even gave a prophecy about what would happen if his lordships continued to act like this, and did not hesitate to say directly that the country would disappear from the maps. Laurentius was murdered in an inn on the way to Ukraine. Just as the legend says, the inn was called Rome. According to the tale, Laurentius, known as Twardowski, was supposed to sign a pact with Morningstar. In exchange for power, however, he was to avoid Rome. So he never went to the Apennine Peninsula, although he had the opportunity to do so. However, the Lord of Justice did not indicate which Rome he was referring to. In a sense, he became a scapegoat, but he worked for such an end with his whole life. Those who cursed Barbara Radziwill now began to spit in their beards, because a new mistress had come, who would not allow anyone to enter the king's presence unless for an appropriate bribe. Only through the Guises could one obtain anything from the king, and they stubbornly defended access to him, pushing away even the Radzivills. Barbara Guise became the most important person in the country right after the king and is said to have borne the king a daughter, whom he recognized, although at that time he was still having an affair with Anna Zajiczkowski. Some people never change. She, on the other hand, was the lover of Nicholas Mniszek for most of their acquaintance. They were truly a modern couple for those times. After mumps, the chances of fathering a child are slim, but not out of the question. As for August's syphilis, it would probably be noticeable after so many years. This does not change the fact that August felt a renewed desire to live, and it was with his beloved Guise that he gave up the ghost. This relationship is a pure transference and only confirms that Barbara Radziwill was August's only great love. After his death, Guise became the wife of Mr. Woolen, with whom she had several children. And the magic mirrors returned after years, although only 2 of them can be seen and survived in fairy tales, legends, and later even in films. Few people remember that they really exist. Petitions to remove the mirror are pure fanaticism. Ignorance and superstition, as well as a lack of understanding of the reason why Bishop Krasinski gave it to the church. They were also supposed to remind superstitious people of something and give them something to think about. Unfortunately, fewer and fewer people think clearly. It cannot be ruled out that at some point some facts from Barbara Radziwill's life merged with the story of Barbara Guise, attributing to the deceased queen the vile deeds of her successor. The women were physically similar. Over time, people could confuse them in stories. Did Augustus deserve to meet Faust? If he understood anything, it was only briefly. The adored Guise quickly became a betrayed one. She owed the king nothing. She also betrayed him and, worse, robbed him. What happened to the legendary pearls of Barbara Radziwill? They were supposedly bought by Elizabeth Tudor, and then they disappeared. Another version says that they were divided and sold, and this was done by Guise and Mniszek after the king's death, who plundered the estate. Mniszek could have taken them to Russia. Then they disappear from history. In any case, an extraordinary legend was born, which fascinates many to this day, although with different comments. The figure of Barbara is very false. She was certainly not a saint, but she was not a whore, as she was called, or a witch, and also a dumb doll. This is the first woman in history about whom we know that this word was used in reference to her, and it was done by one of the best writers of the Renaissance in this part of the world, John Orzechowski, who, although he repented after her death, was quite bad at it. The writer's behavior is an example of the worst type of human hypocrisy, because he uses a disgusting method of changing the way of speaking about someone after death. This disgusting behavior can be found in every latitude of the world. Suddenly, people start to respect those who were not worth respecting in life, because they were drunkards, making them into respectable people in their statements. They also suddenly start to respect those who they did not like in life, oppressed and did not hide it at all, even for their appearance, which they justify by saying that after death everyone is respected. In reality, they are clearing their conscience, in case they innocently accuse someone of sins they did not commit, because they simply did not like something about them, or worse, they like to oppress others. The fact is that Orzechowski wrote lampoons for the king's mother, but she lost her position so much that he could refuse if he wanted to. The money won, and by creating his lampoons he manipulated history. The relationship of these two is not a love like in a fairy tale, but it is certainly an incredible love story of 2 people who wanted to be together, forgetting about everything around them. What is the truth about Barbara? We will never know it if we do not conduct scientific research on this matter and do not stop repeating old, worn-out myths, and unfortunately most even new books are based uncritically on old tales. She is certainly an interesting historical figure. A character who could sell well and advertise the country. Modern people simply love this type of story, and it is a story like from a soap opera, although it really happened. We will never know who made the mirrors, or how Dhur got them. It would be a miracle. It is known that mirrors of this type were not made in Europe. Dhur, or Faust, thanks to his pride became a character about whom masters from several countries wrote novels. This is the same Faust from the Master and Margarita, Twardowski, or the famous Goethe. Butcher, leader, sectarian, manipulator, grey eminence, dangerous man. He certainly did not end up on the moon. Did Lucifer help him leave? The angel of justice certainly had enough of him, but the wish for death was stronger than the two rulers. The emperor and Augustus had had enough of Dhur. France might not have wanted to know about the charlatan's existence either. Dhur overdid it and, what's worse, forgot that the same joke wasn't funny twice. Although he contributed to Augustus' happy ending. At least he thought so when he was dying, although it wasn't a happy ending. Above all, he ridiculed him, and no ruler would forgive that. He certainly came across another incarnate devil, whom he deceived, and this devil, like every Sforza, could not forgive such an insult.